Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I've had a few people ask me lately, hey, you're promoting a lot of overhead pressing, you're talking about the push press and things a lot. Isn't the overhead press dangerous for a lot of people? So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And yeah, that's an interesting question to ask because these days I am focused on the overhead press myself because like I've always told people in the past, usually as far as your overall strength and performance goes, whatever you're bad at, is usually a sign of a muscle imbalance, sign of weakness, and it's not necessarily a good thing. You need to work on it when it's any major thing. For me, my overhead pressing has been my weakest basic athletic function as far as movements go. And it has been for a few years since I came back from being really sick and all that time in bed and away from training. And so, yeah, I'm focusing on it. I probably overhead press 4 to 5 days a week right now, some type, usually clean and push press, but I mix other types in too. It is the primary focus of my training. So it's a good question to ask because it's something I'm doing personally. I'm really big on injury prevention. And we'll get into a minute of why I think overhead pressing is important. But as far as the injuries go, a couple things going on. Number one cause of people who get injuries, and I think even the physical therapists who are not big on overhead pressing will agree with this, it's people who have major muscle imbalances who are at the greatest risk of injury. People who their upper back, their entire upper back structure is too weak. That's the problem. That's where you run into problems with injury there. The most part are people who their upper back is too weak. They have lack mobility in there. Overhead pressing can improve mobility, and that's what people need to remember. Any exercise that you do that pushes stuff through a full range of motion itself can work on your actual mobility. I mean, learning to squat deeper will work on your hip mobility, using weight to force things down. It's when you ego lift with it, when you're still gaining mobility, that's a problem. When you try to lift too much weight or use sloppy form or whatever. But with overhead pressing, usually the sign that someone has a really weak upper back and they are at risk of injury when they go to overhead press if they can't shrug their shoulders up at the top. That's the main thing. When you can shrug your shoulders up at the top, which is something, again, I've been working on a lot myself, just to make sure I've got the technique down, but I also have a very strong upper back because I do lots and lots of deadlifting. And I'm reasonably strong on the deadlift. So for me, I'm not that worried about the upper back weakness, but just making sure that I'm engaging those muscles correctly. It's not being able to engage all the muscles of the upper back correctly at the top that seems to predispose people to injury and put them in the biomechanical positions that can cause that. So usually that's going to be the main thing. Someone who maybe has done a fair amount of pressing of other types, they've built up strength in their pressing muscles, who has a weak upper back. They don't do a lot of rowing. They don't do a lot of deadlifting. They don't work that area very much. Those are the people who are going to be at the actual chance of risk. Now, as far as other things go, different types of overhead press are harder on your shoulders than others. I generally recommend for people a thumb under grip, right? The false grip when overhead pressing. So your elbows end up being in front of you. That's what I do personally. That's how I do it. And even when I do behind the neck presses, and the behind the neck presses are considered to be a relatively dangerous exercise. Yet there are people who do enormous amounts of weight for full range of motion behind the neck and have done so for many, many years who don't have any problems at all. And a lot of it has to do with, again, the mobility that they've built on it and technique they use. It's about how much are they able to bring their elbows forward at the bottom and finding the right grip with. Because the thing is, if you see guys, a lot of guys will do partials behind the neck. They come down a certain distance. I think that's, again, where people get hurt. Just like on the bench press, using a weight that's too heavy for you to comfortably come all the way down and rest it on the traps. If you can't pause the weight on the traps and lift it without pain, it's probably too heavy. So people do partials back there, and then when something goes wrong, they get into trouble because they've reduced their shoulder mobility by short repping it all the time behind the neck. And they're ego lifting. They want to be able to add that extra 30 or 40 or 50 pounds that they can't actually lift. Yet you'll also see guys who are extremely strong behind the neck push pressers, who again never seem to have problems, but it's because they've built that mobility up and they're able to handle a fairly heavy weight coming down and touching their traps and pausing. And the other thing is they're usually using the false grip so that they can get just a little bit of elbow in. And I think the other big dangerous thing are going to be dumbbells. I think dumbbell presses overhead performed incorrectly the way bodybuilders do them. I think that's your other big risk with the overhead press. I'm not big on dumbbells unless you're going to do them with a little bit of pronation of the hand. But people tend to do, you see all these bodybuilders will do these with their elbows all the way back like this. They come down and they can't come all the way down and they're like this. Well, look at my elbow position back here and think about the stress that puts on the rotator cuffs. That's one of your big risks there. And it's even worse because they're using a dumbbell. They're out wide. If something goes wrong, they come down and pull things down even easier. They are predisposing themselves to risk. And I'm not saying people shouldn't ever consider really heavy dumbbell presses, but the thing is, you'll notice all the really strong lifters who for 20 years were able to do heavy dumbbell push presses and stuff. Notice they all bring them in. It's like we talk about, and they can come deeper. That's the other thing. You're out here, you can't even come as deep. Come down here because you have your hands pronated in slightly. The dumbbells aren't facing at a 90 degree with each other. They're like this. You're not only engaging a lot more upper chest, but you can get a deeper range of motion. And again, it puts less stress on the shoulder joint. And that's the main thing. It's hand position more than anything. That's the biggest problem, in my opinion, outside of mobility, bad form, everything else. A lot of people, it's on behind the neck press and the dumbbell press, it's the hand position they use. They're trying to put their hands too far back and their elbows too far back. And it ends up being oftentimes a shorter range of motion lift, ends up compromising the shoulder. It's problematic. But the truth is, when it comes to the overhead press, the overhead press has always been a true test of athleticism, a true test of strength. How much weight can you lift over your head? And there are, again, people who worry about it, but by that same token, look at the people who compete in Olympic lifting or old-time strongman. Many of these people who were really strong strongmen back in the day were still lifting extremely heavy weights overhead well into their old age, because they built up those muscles and mobility over the years. It doesn't become problematic. It's when people do stupid stuff. They let their upper back get weak. They use really bad, anatomically incorrect positions on these exercises that causes problems. But Olympic lifters, there are plenty of Olympic lifters who for their whole career have still continued to lift really heavy overhead work. I mean, that's what Olympic lifts all are. Many of them are successful without any major shoulder injuries, and some of them use absolutely mind-boggling weights even for strict behind-the-neck presses, like Dmitry Koklov. I'm not sure if I said his name right. This guy, I think he's pretty much retired now from Olympic lifting. Extremely strong overhead presser on every type, not just the Olympic lifts. The guy's a powerhouse, and if you look at his structure, he ended up having really what a lot of people would call an aesthetic structure, and that's the interesting thing. People who get really, really, really strong on the overhead pressing because of what it does to the shoulder girdle, the triceps, all those pressing muscles involved, they end up being what all the kids today in this fitness community like to call aesthetic. It seems to be a game changer there because it brings up the entire shoulder girdle. The long head of the tricep gets worked a lot. All these other things, all these muscles that people need to have that look. A lot of heavy overhead pressing does that. And I think that's, again, part of the classic physique look comes from the overhead pressing, because that was something that all of these guys focused on back in the day. All your classic physique guys, everyone from Steve Reeves to Reg Park and all these other people, they were all very strong on the overhead press. They focused on the overhead press. They even did a lot of behind the neck pressing. You'll see a lot of guys, again, like Dmitry, you look at their overall look, they have that look. Heavy focus on the overhead press. But it has always been considered in strength and athleticism one of the top movements to determine how strong you are. It's a true test of strength. How much weight can you press up over your head? And done correctly, people don't get injuries from it. It's muscle imbalances. It's really bad technique that causes the injuries. And it's not to say that people need to be haphazard about it. People might need time to build up that mobility. They might need time to build up their upper back before they start really overhead pressing a lot. But done correctly, and like with any other exercise, you don't put yourself into a position to where you're going to be injured as far as elbow positioning goes. Ego lifting, using weights that you can't handle correctly, you can avoid injury, and you end up being stronger and better for it. And like I said, a lot of field athletes, the overhead press and push press is probably better than the bench press or what they're trying to do as far as carry over to their sport. And again, tons of people have gotten extremely strong on these exercises without injury, but the thing is, it's the manner in which they go about doing so. And that's the thing. Any exercise can injure you if performed incorrectly. Any exercise can injure you if performed incorrectly, or you allow certain muscle imbalances to happen. But the overhead press is a lift that, as long as you have a well-rounded strength going into it, and you're aware of things like where you place your hands, hand position, and again, avoiding really silly stuff, whether it's a dumbbell or a barbell behind the neck, of watching where your elbows are relative to your shoulder joint, and using hand positions and bar paths that are going to avoid that. And if you can do that, and you can get everything set correctly, and you only use weights that you are capable of controlledly coming down, resting on your traps and pressing from the very bottom from a dead stop without pain, as long as you stick to weights you can always do that with, no matter how heavy they get, it starts to become relatively safe. It's, again, people being foolish, people being ignorant, people ego lifting that is the biggest concern as far as overhead pressing goes. And I think a lot of physical therapists and other people realize that. A lot of people are ego lifters, and they are stupid. And that is an exercise that, if you get stupid with it, yeah, it can hurt you. But so is the deadlift, and the deadlift is still one of the greatest exercises of all time. But people need to remember to train smart, and don't let your ego get the best of you. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.